And the alternative to the notion of atom plus interaction producing a structure, or in the other direction, structure producing individual, is this very strange notion that Tard, who I remember those of you who would ignore Gabriel Tard, was a French sociologist, one of the founders of French sociology at the end of the 19th century, called monads. A monad is a term that's borrowed from Leibniz, but of course Leibniz had God, which would be nice here, but not in Tard. There's no God. They are overlapping entities. Every one of them is an individualizing view, is the word that Leibniz used, on the whole. But you will see that individual and whole change considerably if you follow the notion of monad. Okay, so a monad is a point of view on all the other entities taken severally, not as whole, severally. Now that's the main argument that Tard, and no one really understood what Tard meant by that. So people in monadology and sociology, which is the most bizarre book ever written in social theory, you will see now that it's in English how bizarre is the argument. What I'm doing here is that I take this very bizarre argument and a very common and easy to use interface digitally available. Okay? So I make the crossover and I say this digitally available profile vindicates an argument which seems very obscure in Tard's time. And what does Tard's time argument is? Very simple. It's the one on the dot becoming a CV, and then you stop the search and you circle it and say, this is a substance. The substance, which is exactly the same argument as what is the whole, is where you stop the search and have the list out of the dot that you had first. So that, in fact, the misplacement I was talking before is this. We have confused the micro-macro with a process of searching for data sets. That's what really I'm saying. And then it's very possible to raise now a new question. Every one of us is not in an institution. We are a monad, every one of us, actually, for Tard, every cell of our body, but I will leave that aside, is a monad. Overlapping with other monads. There is no individual, because the monad is not an individual, it's the whole world reflected individually, and the whole world taken separately. And the key question now is, do we have the data set allowing us to navigate through overlapping monads? Okay, that's the argument. I agree, it's a slightly bizarre argument, but the nice thing is that it's not limited to humans. And in the nice talk we heard yesterday as another keynote, I noticed that we talk about organization, but not about organism. Now, the great thing about the monadological principle is that it's not limited to humans. Every time it has been tried on other entities, baboon, ants, scientific papers, companies like Latour4, bacteria is my favorite example. It makes a big difference. So for example, there is a guy, Taddy, who studied bacteria and began to monadologize the bacteria instead of assembling them in statistical cloud. And what did he notice? Well, what has been found by Tard and what has been found on baboons and so on, is that individualizing the bacteria meant that differences between bacteria were finally visible, an immense difference, much more difference between two bacteria than between two humans, actually, according to him. It goes to the difference between the ability of the bacteria to influence its surrounding can be 35,000 more or less than another bacteria just next to it. So you see, the world that is emerging out of a monadological principle does not have the same feel. It's not atoms inside a structure. It's overlapping monads which have not, and it's not limited to humans, which don't have the same feel at all as the old question that organization study has borrowed from organism and the other way around. This is not the case. On the contrary, the same social theory question is now reopened for bacteria, bodies, corporations, paradigm, baboons, ants, you name it. The weight of a two-level standpoint is now much more limited. And that's what is so nice in this argument. It's now possible for all this entity to forget entirely about this old simile, which has infected our field so much with simile of the stomach and the bodies that we learn from Shakespeare's and Menenius and lots of others. We are finally out of that. And I think that's what is interesting. So the idea is really to to bypass, I would say, the notion of interaction as well as the notion of structure. Of course, and here you know that much better than I do, when we deal with human and not with ants or bacteria, of course we never deal with whole which are bigger than the part, but we deal with lots of local what I call for this reason oligopticon. So there is something intermediary between one level and the two level, which is what I call 1.5 level. Every one of the organizer, everyone actually, it has been demonstrated very nicely, everyone in the OLA has an idea of the whole OLA. So there are lots of other whole OLA locally embedded into one another. So of course there is a difference between ants and bacteria, but it's not because we would have organization and they would not have organization, or they would have organization and we would not have organization. It's because the overlapping of the monad is different. Okay, last point, and I'm in time, and that's much more tentative, and if there are anyone here interested in quantitative methods and quali-quantitative methods as I call them, I will be interested to talk at the end of this, with them at the end of this lecture. All of that is very nice, and you have agreed with everything I said, but you have a sort of slight worry. How does it look when you begin not to have atomic entity interacting, producing a structure, but overlapping monads, each of them having a whole, reflecting in one way? Well, it's a big question, and the result is horrible. That I have to say. And it's even worse with this bad screen there. Now the point which is important is that you have to follow me on that point, is that when you define a profile and you define attributes, every single attribute is modified by the other's attribute in that list. So again, to take the example of a diploma, if you want to know is this a good university or not, what do? Well, you list the guys who are there that you know. And you say, well, it's a good university because so-and-so is professor there, and so-and-so went there, right? Which means that every change in the attributes modify the other attributes which are in that list. This is the solution, the monadological solution to the notion of profile. That's what a profile is. So the attributes are specified by the other attributes in which they are. And that's where it could be another take, another way from yesterday's keynote to cut the pie between what is an organization, what is a network, and so on. With this actor network flat argument, of course, and I'm sure you will disagree with it, because it's another cutting of a pie. All of these words, institution, organization, network, are just ways of measuring the extension in time and space of attributes. But it's another way of playing the superposition of monads. But the problem is, how do you visualize them? Well, it's as horrible as that. And the more you look at it, the more horrible it is. The nice thing here, the nice example here, I'm drawing from a paper we have been submitted with a physicist, a friend of mine, who has taken the best example we have in terms of data set, which is the notion of paradigm. For scientific institution, because of the numbers of things available digitally, we have masses of information on what we publish, who publishes, what the word we use, and so on. So it's very interesting to use this mass of data and to ask the following question: what is this institution or coordination, to use the word yesterday, that is called a paradigm? I mean, if you look at the list of papers in this conference, and if you want to say, what's the paradigm of egos, you will have difficulties, right? There is no an umbrella paradigm inside which every one of you